Well, it's great to meet you all, and you're in the middle of a very long day. It was a very large executive meeting, so hopefully now we can do some interactive pieces as well. But what I was hoping to do now until lunch is spend some time with you, as you can see on the slide, talking about the High Performance Schools project, which is something that I guess occupies my time a lot, as well as introducing, as David said, some of the information that's driving our thinking, working with schools around sustainable culture change. So that's our agenda now. Look, it's a two-part, I'm a son of a preacher man, so normally you get a three-part sermon. The good news for us all is it's a two-part sermon. And so in the first part of the time here, I want to unpack the High Performance Schools project a bit, just share some findings, have some discussions about that. And in the second part of our time, I want to talk about sustainable culture change. And again, interact with you around some of those things. So as we move on, I always think it's important, firstly, to declare up front what I'm not good at. And I'm not good at having boy children. I have 5 daughters. So I level the playing field up front. From 16 down to twins turning 2 in just a couple of days' time. So as you can see, I get really, really tired sometimes. And does anyone else here have teenage daughters? Or at the risk of, the level of wisdom and maturity in the room, adult daughters? Right, well, can I just put a cry out for help? Any tips? Any tips at all?
Move out.
Hey, so that's a little about me. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. My PhD was in cognitive behaviour therapy and burnout. So there's been a lot of stuff I've learned over the years. And of course, with that sort of family configuration, I also experience burnout regularly on a personal level. Look, the next thing I wanted to do with you while we just get this stuff happening is a little table-based warm-up. In the high-performance schools world, we're real sticklers for little bits of process. We don't have lots of it, but we've got little bits of it and we really stick to it. Let's keep moving then and get into the first part of our time together. What I want to share with you is the High Performance Schools project and what we've been up to. On your table, you've got these little shrink wrap packs. And you've previously, as David highlighted, all been mailed a copy of this. We've got a couple of boxes of giveaway resources from High Performance Schools all out there, as well as some order forms. So once those resources run out, we will ask you to order them. But you've all got this one. We're going to work off now in this next section, this one. If you do enjoy just flicking through something as we go, this is the one we're going to focus on in the next section. All right, thank you. So in terms of what I've been up to and my team, we've been doing this High Performance Schools project. And we've spent the last 3 years now, we're working with about 628 leaders. I think it's gone up a bit more since we prepared this. 124 schools to date we've been working with, and over 3,500 teachers do weekly pulse surveys in terms of wellbeing and other things. And it's taught us a lot. Essentially, the whole project revolves around looking at a framework, a high-performance teams framework, and then co-constructing a bunch of strategies with the school about how to translate that to something meaningful in terms of making a difference in their school, and then sticking around and making sure those strategies improve student achievement and staff well-being. It's a pretty simple idea, not rocket science. But it's been really rewarding in what we're doing. My background, of course, is I didn't expand much further other than my 5 daughters and my crazy parenting. But the other part of my background is in healthcare reform and government reform. So I've spent a lot of years understanding how we do health and hospitals and communities, and a lot of years in government. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been privileged to work almost exclusively in education. And I said to a colleague the other day, I've never felt so much moral purpose in what I do. Because as we can see up there, education's the pressure point for Australian society. We have 3.5 million students under our care. You guys are responsible for parts of this 300,000 teacher environment. And in Australia, we have over 9,000 schools. So that's a pretty complicated sandpit. It's also a sandpit where the future is cast. We haven't necessarily done a great job with our social, economic and environmental policies and behaviours, and this next generation that we're in charge of their learning, they're the people that have to fix it. And they're going to need all the help they can get when we look at the impacts that we know about environmentally, just for one example. And it really is up to us. It's up to us as leaders to design the structure and the systems and how the workforce moves through that school so that everyone is able to give their best to their students and those teaching moments are maximised. And to do that, of course, we need to take a step back and understand those systems around high performance teams. It comes as no surprise as well, of course, to understand our school culture. You know, culture being the way we do things around here, simple definition. But that culture accounts for up to 95% of the variance of student achievement. And that's pretty important, again, for us as principals and leaders to understand our responsibility as architects of that school culture. You know, the other part of this in understanding the importance of culture is understanding some of the pressure points, the unusual hazards that education has compared to other industries. There are two serious risks you have that hospitals don't have, for example, or not to the level you experience them in schools, that other organisations don't have. As you can see up here, the first one's about a thing called emotional dissonance. And that's that experience that we have. Some of us as parents know it when we're feeling a little frustrated with our children and we try to keep the veneer of calmness up. Can anyone relate to that? Yeah? Well, that same phenomena occurs in nurses, flight attendants, call centre workers, police officers, ambulance officers, and the number one risk category is teachers. Teachers have the longest exposures to emotional dissonance simply because they're standing in front of a class and on a bad day, that can burn their energy fiercely. They can't just tap out and walk away. In a call centre, they can't just hit the red button, get a 3-minute downtime and then go back into the queues. They have to stay and play. And on those bad days, we know they're burning a lot of extra energy. That's why teacher wellbeing, you know, if you're a professor type, you know, there's a huge importance in it at that level. The other element that's unique to schools compared to other organisations, in my experience, is this bottom circle about the quality of relationships between the teacher and the student. Now, has anyone here ever has everyone got a mobile phone? Yeah, pretty common. Has anyone ever had a problem where you'd had to ring your phone company and stay on hold and clarify, you know, maybe a billing issue or something? Have you ever had that after holding on, you then clicked over and got sent to somebody else and you had to tell the story all over again? Were you happy about that experience? No. It'd make you smile and go, gee, I love telling the same story over and over again to all these people who I'm not sure if they care. Well, we know this in hospitals as well. When the patient has to cycle through multiple doctors and nurses during their recovery, do you think their recovery is shortened or lengthened? Lengthened. Continuity. And so we know again in schools the same thing occurs where a student doesn't have that stable, predictable attachment cycle because people are on leave, there's relief staff, there's turnover. We know that is an adverse factor to their academic achievement. It's pretty straightforward. And the reason I'm going on about this right now is because these two hazards are not things we can simply fix as school leaders, can we? We can't shorten classroom times down to ridiculous nothing or have a giant red button so when I've had enough I just walk out. That's not possible, that's not practical, and that's not what we're here for. So we have to mitigate the risk using other strategies to maximise teachers' wellbeing. Just like we do lifting training for road workers, and we get those bags of concrete down to a certain weight, we can only do so much, but we need to be working on both those things, and we need to be working on that in terms of wellbeing for our teaching staff, not trying to compromise the integrity of the classroom itself. Similarly with the students, you know, there's a certain amount of rotating staff, of people going away. You know, we can't stop that completely. What we can do is have a greater awareness of that, and again, as leaders, plan the structure, plan our culture to offset those risks. And that, to me, is something that's really important and that you hold the keys to as school leaders. Schools are also workplaces, and that's been an interesting thing over these 3 years when I'd work with schools and I'd talk about things we learn in hospitals or other environments. I used to get shouted down on the fact that I had no idea what it was like in a school because schools are different. Schools are different, but they're different in their complexity. They're not different in as much as you have people working there for large sections of their lives, having to get along together and achieve an outcome. In that sense, they're similar. And what we know, of course, in any workplace, school, hospital or other, is that people spend a lot of time at work. And you can see that they spend more time at work than any other thing they will do in their life except sleep. And of course we know in education you guys spiked that equation further, because what did you do in your childhood, adolescence, uni years, and then you rolled it over again? Your exposure to school is like 40% of your life. If that's the case, isn't it so important that we turn our attention to our workforce culture? Why don't we try and make this place as enjoyable as possible so everyone can fit in, and as sustainable as possible so everybody can achieve? And that's that grassroots pitch, if you like, that we encourage you to do with your staff. If they may or may not have that moral motivation that fluctuates as we go through our lives, you know how we can connect up with that purpose. But we can all connect with this purpose. If we can fit in and stand out better at work, it's going to be a good place. So a lot of the work we do, we liken it to this simple illustration of road rules. In Australia, we have road rules and we're sticklers for road rules, right? You get in trouble if you drive through a red light. Is that true? Yeah. If you get caught. Or if you have an accident. And so road rules are there for a reason, aren't they? Now, we don't tell you what type of car you can drive, or motorbike, or truck. You know, there's all this diversity on the road with cars, isn't there? Yeah, and we're not here to interfere with your personal freedom to drive the car you want to drive. We are here to say you'll drive on the left-hand side of the road, thanks very much, and we'll start doing things to you if you don't. Does that make sense? That is what a great culture is. Some explicit rules that everybody understands and can follow, but only a few, so that everyone can get on with that diversity, differentiation, being themselves, but all stick on the left-hand side of the road. And that's what we like and what the work we do too about culture. We need to make things explicit for people, a certain amount of things, so that everyone can get along in the school and not spend 30% of their mental and emotional energy trying to suss everybody out, trying to work out, how come that person doesn't get into trouble for that and that person does? You know, how come there's all these different cultural norms and I can't wrap my head around them? You know, we say no to that. Let's simplify those cultural norms, make them explicit so everybody can play. And that then frees up 30% of that energy to do what as a teacher? To enhance your teaching, to do the very thing that you're passionate about. And that is valuable. 30% more discretionary effort focused on students is going to translate to good things. Good things. So I thought a quick check-in at this point, another quick table-based discussion. When you think about those road rules in your school, what would be the top 3 or 4 cultural absolutes for you as a school leader that you have or want to see known and clear across all your staff? I'll just give you a couple of minutes at your tables. Thank you. Alrighty, let's keep moving then. So when we're thinking about the road rules, if you like, for a high-performance culture, we have this little diagram that we refer to called the High Performance Teams Framework. And it presents, I guess, a pretty simple way to think about your culture, about a high-performance culture. Because it effectively says to be a high-performance team or a high-performance school, we have to get 2 things working well, and I'm sure you'd agree. We need high achievement, you know, those, our ICSIA ratings, our school outcomes, our annual reports, our A to E, our NAPLAN, we need that as high as we can possibly get it. That's a good thing. But we also need to do that in a way where we maintain high engagement. We can't just be a super competitive achiever culture and leave collateral damage along the way. That's no good. That's no good at all. We have to bring people with us. So we have to have the glue that holds us together as well as, I guess, the carrot that we pedal after, for want of a better way to say that. That still sits pretty theoretically for a lot of people. So we break it down further, as you can see, to these 4, what we call them KPIs or indicators, key performance indicators. 2 of them relate to achievement. You'll see the first one there is about vision and action, which I think was said nicely over here before, particularly with small schools, but in large schools we still have to work at the same achievement level, that everybody understands our core purpose and the critical actions therein. The second one is called performance reporting, and that simply relates to information and data. Data, be it qualitative information or quantitative, how that information is used and how we all use that as a team so that we can stay on track, so that we can exceed targets when those annual or quarterly measurements come in. We have data telling us if we're on the way. We call them lead indicators. Performance reporting also is about the hygiene of time and the discipline of how we run meetings and things like that too, but I'll unpack that in a minute. The other side of the puzzle here is about engagement. And again, we look at two things for engagement. We look at this thing called leveraging diversity. Pretty simple idea. We talk about diversity being just anything that's different between us. Don't get too technical about it. Anything that might cause a rub. You know, we may not be great friends outside of work. We may not have a beer. We may not all go on holidays together with our kids. But despite that social difference, we understand enough about each other to work really powerfully, effectively, and cohesively when we're at school. And that's what leveraging diversity is about. The last one of the two that makes for high engagement is that idea of understanding people's work life and well-being, putting people in their context. They say that about 80% of performance management should not be happening because it's driven by a personal problem, not by an actual overt intention to underperform. But the lack of trust among us, the lack of disclosure means we wind up in places with people that aren't good for either us as leaders or them. Remember, there's still a legitimate place for performance management. We're not saying that. We're just saying a lot of it, though, could be headed off at the pass if we had greater levels of trust and disclosure and understood people better. So that's the background, that's the theory point, if you like, where we put this over into the schools and translate that into meaningful action. And so what I want to do now as we start to draw through towards the end of our first part of our time together is I just want to share with you 10 simple insights that have come out of this 3 years of work with these 124 schools. Things that we've learned through our partnerships in listening and engaging with schools. I want to break it down through those 4 KPIs. The first one, of course, is around this vision and action. And there were 2 particular things we learnt with schools. The linkages around their school-wide pedagogy or their core purpose or their school motto, and then their action plans and their AIPs and their tools. You know, we learned a lot about how that does and doesn't work. We also learned a lot about this one, this collaboration issue, about how once you finally get it all clear and everyone on the same page, how do you govern it? How does it roll out and turn into something really powerful? Of course, from an artifacts level, we're simply talking about your mission and vision and your core values. Most schools have very clear and well marketed and organised messages around that stuff, as you can see in the examples. And most schools, certainly all schools in Queensland, have annual improvement plans, strategy documents, AIPs. It's the extent to which these things get used and organised in the daily life of the staff. That's the bit we're trying to tap into when we're talking about a high-performance school. So to unpack this a little bit further, when we're talking about linking vision and action, we're talking about the AIPs and then how they are organised and broken down and chunked out into marketable messages, bits of information that staff grab and constantly feel like they understand the bigger picture between what they're doing and what the end game is. And we spend a lot of time working with school leadership teams, wrestling some of that into a much more smooth and organised and purposeful statement for staff so that they can take action over that and feel confident over that. The second part here is about collaborating for improvement. And there's a tremendous amount of work going on in primary schools around professional learning teams or PLCs, professional learning communities. Again, wonderful work being done. Our concern is around the governance of that. How does the work they're doing ultimately connect with your improvement plans and then connect into the information management that tells us we're on track or off track? How do we make sure those communities are tasked with outcomes that are within their scope about culture, about behaviour, and we don't confuse them and give them responsibility over line management type outcomes? We've seen many examples in schools where committees or learning communities have carriage over things that, as principals, you'd prefer to keep to yourself. You know, you then lose track of it because they're driving things that are critical to your outcomes, and you want them driving things that are critical to your culture. So I guess teasing that apart a little bit has been quite valuable for some schools. There's some homework there. We've got little quick starts infographics, just chunking that out really easily for you so you can see what we mean in that regard. please take a look at that when you can. It's a way to continue your thinking and do it yourself. You know, it's a DIY way just to keep moving forward with this idea. The last bit here is, of course, a quick rating. And we always like, if you've spent the time thinking about that, to stop and in your own mind, perhaps, or if you've got a pen, tick the booklet, tick where you think you're at. When you consider these two things, are you smashing it out? Or is there room to improve? Is there room to improve? Let's keep going. The second, I guess, tranche of insights that came out of this work in the High Performance Schools project was around performance reporting. And you can see here three things: monitoring lead indicators, having team-specific data walls, and using effective meeting protocols. What are we talking about here? With protocols, obviously we're talking about agendas, about moderators, red and yellow cards, time management, documenting things in a certain way. And then, as you can see, we're talking about data walls, and data walls not just for education, but data walls that are actually about us and our teaming and our rules for behaviour and what we're here to do. And that's the low-hanging fruit for education, of course. Data walls are very normal. You guys own that space, but many schools we work with don't actually apply it onto their own teaming behaviour. They simply use them for other purposes for which they should be used. But let's bring it back up and use it for ourselves with our workforce. So, of course, lead indicators. When you have that vision and you're so clear about your purpose, you obviously want to measure that stuff. Most schools I work with, part of their purpose statement involves some connection to the local community. And so what are the lead indicator data from your local community that you need to be taking on board? Not just the departmental data systems. What are the things you can go out and grab as well in the community to tell you whether you're on track or not? We're doing a lot of work with some large high schools at the moment, and they're striking up partnerships with local mental health services and with local governments, because there's this whole data bank of information around the prevalent stuff of industry trends, which predict employment, of course, and prevalence of mental health issues, which tell them if the types of behaviour problems and mental health issues in their school, they've got the right types that are going on in the community. Have they got a right amount of that? Or are people suppressing their symptoms in school, hiding stuff? And we all know we don't want kids to hide their mental health symptoms, do we? Because that leads to bad things. So just leaning in and understanding your lead indicator data and grabbing some other information can transform how a school stays on track towards fulfilling its purpose. Team-specific data walls, look, it's pretty obvious. Once you understand your ground rules, your road rules, you just put them up somewhere. When you meet together, you reference them. Once your AIP's chunked out into the relevant year levels or faculties, again, you put it up somewhere and you stay accountable to it. Once your teaching cycle, your inquiry cycle, whatever those documents are, you put them up on a data wall and you stay accountable. So simple. And then finally, meeting protocols. You have a lot of meetings in schools, is that fair? Yeah, and the three big ones are the staff meetings, the year level meetings, the leadership team meetings, and we're big fans of it, but it's, we're angels fear to tread. How do we make those P&C meetings as disciplined and well organised as some of those other ones? Again, we put a lot of effort into a couple of key explicit road rules in those meetings, and if you take the time to just get those couple of things working right, live notes, structured agendas, the use of a chair, the use of a moderator, if you just work hard on that stuff, you get all the benefits that go on and on and on thereafter. Some homework here for you. Have a look in your booklets to unpack any of that stuff. And again, rate where you're at. Where do you see you're at with this? Where do you see you're at? Clearly, you might be getting a lot of this stuff right. Hopefully, too, we're triggering some opportunities for improvement too. Some conversations with some other community providers who had a bit of information that relates to you fulfilling your purpose. So exciting when you can make those connections. Almost there. We're on the other side now and we're looking at engagement. What did we learn in these 3 years around engagement? When it comes to leveraging diversity, we learn obviously about the topic itself and also about a culture of feedback. What do we mean by all of that? Well, leveraging diversity, of course, is about finding out all sorts of different things about people. And up there you've got some shots about people doing team profiles, about people playing games with colour cards, has anyone heard of Oz identities? Are you a kangaroo, a dolphin, etc.? Any of those, Myers-Briggs, you name it, they're all great. Provided whatever tools we use, we can then have a proper breakout discussion about, as well as write some things down on a talent map, capture them so we don't have to remember. We can go back and check it out later on our data wall. That's critical. Of course, we also need to know about acceptable, unacceptable behaviour, what we call the above and below the line process, but the real value in that one is the grey zone. getting staff to a point where they open up about the niggles, about the little things, about the things that are spoken or unspoken that drive each other nuts, and creating a mature and, again, documented process so that we have a safe language about how to call people on that and how to deal with that. Very valuable. Remember that culture will always eat your strategy for breakfast. So this is one of your big ticket items to get this stuff right. We've said that then, creating these talent maps, these team profiles, loading all the information into an Excel sheet that people are happy to disclose on record, and all people are happy to tell a little bit. Get it all organised, put it on the share drive, allow people to go and check it again. We can't remember everything when people do share, so we can capture it at a level they're comfortable, and all of us can go back and check it. Maximising morale and engagement. Culture of feedback, of course, understanding the subtleties and the complexities of us as leaders. Our personality, our extroversion or introversion, the other person, the collision. Feedback itself is stressful. Okay? You're always in the powerful position as a school leader, and you don't know, no matter how gracious and flawless you are, you still don't know how anxious the other person really is. And so how do we tool up and get to a very high level of capability in body language and articulation so that we can deal with some of the most frightened and concerned people, as well as deal with people who might become reactive? Again, some homework tasks there for you if you want to have a look at those things. Moment of truth, where are you at? Just have a quick think about that, reflect on that. And let's get into the final bit of part one. 3 things in work life and well-being. It really boils down to trust, doesn't it? If ever you had one of the high performance teams indicators that was about trust, this is it. You need to get people to disclose. But to do that, you need to have a culture of continuous team building. You have to have a culture where sharing goals is okay, and you have to have a culture where we normalise having a bad day. We normalise sharing tips and tricks that help us when we're under pressure. Those are the things, again, like leveraging diversity, those are the things that create tremendous mileage for you, and those are the things that will eat your strategy for breakfast if you're not paying attention to them as a leader. Okay? Icebreaker cards, warm-ups, we've already done them here today. Just never stopping that stuff. Don't make a lot of time for it, but never skip it. You know, keep that continuous team building going. And then have, as trust builds, have life strategy conversations. Actually talk about your resiliency tips, the well-being things that work for you. Keep that culture going. Because when we have continuous team building, we always have emotional energy in the tank. Have you heard that expression? And when a relationship comes under pressure, how much is in the tank will let you know how far you're going to get in resolving the issues. When we share work-life goals, we build peer relationships, we put people in their context. And as leaders, you get a thing called vulnerability going. And vulnerability is critical for high-performance teams, the ability to share and engage. Again, we're not talking about sharing things that make you uncomfortable. We're not talking about hanging out your dirty laundry. But we are saying there's more to life than running around and telling everyone, I'm a private person. But that's not okay in a high-performance environment. Finally, prioritising the well-being. We've said earlier about, remember, emotional dissonance, your risk factors in your industry and in education, and they're worse than any other. How much more important is a safe and common language around these things? Unpack these, please, in your own time. All of these things you can just DIY, you can just get started on straight away. And have a think about this. I'm going to end this first part of our time with this little scorecard. Because one of the simplest things you can do is immediately know your strengths. Okay? We need to know what we're already doing well at, and all schools are doing well at some, if not most, if not all of this stuff. So I want you to identify at least one of these KPI sets that you're currently, as a school, pretty proud of, quite frankly. You're doing great. And then I want you in your tables to also say, and if I had to pick one where I'd like to put more effort in, I'd pick this other one. Just give you a couple of minutes in your tables to share your own, I guess, high and low, quick grabs when you think about this material. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Top priorities at the moment, sustainability, and with that consistency and collaboration. And that's part of the PDs where I'm very picking the PDs that my staff do, and QASSP is very much on board with it for the next part of our journey.
Relationships are all we have, and if you can build relationships not only between your school leadership and teachers, but the teachers building relationships with the students, to improve the education they get. It also lowers behaviour in classes if the teachers are prepared to build that relationship, and that's including relief teachers coming in, building a relationship and then teaching kids. But the other thing is schools and communities. So the school's got to build relationships with the school community to maximise the effect for the learning of the kids.
For my school, we need everybody to be on the same page. It's a regional combination of a regional and an urban school setting, low socioeconomic, many poor families, many families who don't have access to technology, and many families who are generationally unemployed. Has a big impact on people's understanding about how education can help them cross the divide for themselves and their families. So that's a really important strategy, is to get that partnership between the school and the home, and a clear understanding between both groups about how those things can work together to improve things without saying you're not doing a good job. Because I think there's a lot of fear in our community with our families that think that we will view them negatively because many of their experiences with government departments are negative. We can't afford to be in that space. We need to be working together for our children and for their futures and for our futures as well, because these are the people who are going to be making decisions about us as we age.
Well, as they always are for QASSP, it's about leadership, and it's about helping leaders become better at their job and better at managing the complexities of that job, because it's an ever-changing and complex job. I think the collaboration and inquiry space is a really interesting space for us this year. I think for a professional association, I mean, people like Michael Fullen and others are saying that the work that's done in the middle can be a very powerful advocate for system improvement. So the government and the department can set the right policy parameters. We know that school leaders will do great work across the state. So for the professional association, it's really about working in the middle and making those connections and bringing that to the fore. So things like our symposium later in the year are really about getting that great practice and bringing people together to share the stories and collaborate in that area.
I think probably the most important area to look at in terms of building high performance schools in Queensland, making sure that we're working to develop collaboration and teamwork, trying to make sure that that school leaders are working together, and we're doing a bit of work in the area of networks of inquiry and innovation to try to help people along that journey.